Hello everybody, welcome to the studio. Hopefully you're all having amazing creative days. So today we're going to be talking about the R5 and the R5 Mark II. So I've had the R5 since day one, since it was first released, since it was first announced, pre-ordered it, really fell in love with this camera. Up until the R5 Mark II and R1 were announced, I really touted this as the best camera Canon has ever made. Absolutely love this camera. Now I upgraded to the EOS R5 Mark II, and I've had it for about a month. I've put it through its paces. I've done some photo shoots for clients. I've done some video work for clients. I've made some YouTube videos. And I think I can give you some opinions on the R5 Mark II and let you know whether or not this camera is worth your money. Is it worth upgrading? Do I regret buying it? Is it going to, like, the big question is, like, as a YouTuber, I can make content with this camera and share my content with all of you guys, and that has value to me. But if you're just running a photography business or a videography business, will the R5 Mark II give you deliverables that are going to enhance the quality that you get from the R5? Are your clients really going to be like, wow, that camera is amazing. Oh my God, those shots are so good. I'm going to pay you more money. So we're going to take a look at and just like, and I know it's not fair because the R5 Mark II is brand new, still on firmware 1.0.0. No firmware announcements have been made yet, so it does need some firmware updates from my findings so far. So yeah, in this video, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a look at both these cameras. I'm gonna give you my opinions, and this is gonna be kind of like a podcast style. I'm gonna go through all these topics here, and I'm just gonna talk about each one in order. I'm gonna try and keep it quick and to the point, and I'm trying to structure how I'm presenting the information in such a way that it's for people who have the R5 and wanna upgrade to the R5 Mark II. All right, so with that being said, let's get into it. All right, so the first topic is price. Here we have the R5, here we have the R5 Mark II. So what does this all mean? The R5 Mark II right now is the most expensive 5 series camera that Canon has ever put out there. We're talking about the original 5D, 5D Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV, R5, and now the R5 Mark II. So this is the most expensive one. Is it worth the money? Is it worth the price? We're going to be talking about that or examining that as we go, but I don't know. I don't know, because this camera is just a little bit better than this camera. So you can probably buy 2 of these cameras and be very happy and run a business and make a lot of money and get clients and give them amazing deliverables with 2 of these instead of 1 of these, or just 1 of these and a good lens. So I don't know, it depends. Everybody's different. Everybody's budget's different. Everyone's business is different. Everyone has different amounts of clients and stuff like that. But that's just one thing I wanted to point out, that maybe having 2 of the same camera is more beneficial to you than having the latest and greatest camera with all the new specs, because it's only just a little bit better than the R5. Okay, and another thing to consider is which camera are you upgrading from? From the R5 to the R5 Mark II, it's not that much of a jump, but if you're still shooting with, let's say, a 5D Mark IV, or you're shooting with another DSLR of some sort, or maybe you're on the original R6 or something like that, or you're an R8 and you want to make a big jump, then that's a different story. But R5 to R5 Mark II, it's not that big of a jump. All right, so let's talk about ease of use and ergonomics. Is there a difference between these 2 cameras? So really, no, there isn't much difference. You can pick up the R5 Mark II if you're familiar with the R5, or even if you're familiar with the 5D Mark IV or 3, the buttons, the dials, the joystick, the layout, everything is pretty much identical. Canon, one thing I like about Canon is they don't really change everything too much. Like if you have your muscle memory already set to your buttons and dials, if you upgrade to another camera, pretty much, you know, everything is still going to be in the same place, provided you're in the same series. One of the things that I really like here is that Canon moved the on-off switch to this side of the camera. So now the on-off switch is right here beside your trigger finger, and I'm super happy to see that. As somebody who shoots weddings and events and things like that, it's so nice to have one-handed operation. You can pull the camera up, flip it on, and shoot. And as we'll discuss later in this video, having the on-off switch right here and so accessible is going to help you extend your battery life, because the battery life on this thing, terrible, terrible. But we'll talk about that after. This on-off switch, I think Canon made a step forward by putting it on the right side, but then they also made a step back by limiting its functionality, which I don't understand, because on one hand, you have your on-off switch on the right side, which is great. And if you're holding a lens and you want to go into video mode, you have to let go of your lens and then flip the switch on the other side to go to video mode, which I don't understand, and I don't want to rant here, but it just doesn't make any sense to me, because on cameras like the R7, you had an off in photo mode and video mode on the same switch. So you could turn the camera off, you could switch it to photo, switch it to video with the same switch. And now this switch is off, lock, and on. Like, I just don't get it. I don't get it. Like if you're shooting birds or weddings or events or something like that, and you want to quickly switch to video, you have to literally let go of your lens, go back here, and I mean, you could also hit the record button. You can program the record button to record, I think, in one of the C1, C2, C3 functions in video mode. But still, like, if you want to access your full-on video mode, it should have been right here. Like, anyway, I'm going to drop it because I could talk about this and rant for hours about Canon. But yeah, I just don't understand that choice. All right, so let's talk about viewfinders, because there's a little bit of a difference here between the viewfinders, but not as much as you would think. So the R5 Mark II has the bigger looking viewfinder, but in actuality, when you compare both cameras, the viewfinder is about the same. I thought the R5 Mark II was going to have a bigger, brighter viewfinder that was going to be a lot more impressive than the original R5, but it wasn't. And that was one of the things that really excited me about this camera. Another thing too is I have deep set eyes. So they're kind of like further back in my skull. And so when I have these cameras set to display mode 2, which is a little bit smaller, I can see the display in both cameras through the electronic viewfinder, no problem. But if I set it to large, I can see it fine with the R5, but the R5 Mark II, because of, I guess, the depth of this viewfinder, the corners of the images start to get obscured by, I guess, the eye cup. So I can't see the whole thing. So I have no choice but to shoot in display mode 2 with the R5 Mark II, whereas with the R5, I could shoot with both. So if you have deep set eyes, that's probably something to consider. The biggest thing that I found with the R5 Mark II is that depending on the lens you're using and what you're shooting, like I like to use a lot of lines for compositions. I like vertical lines, horizontal lines. And when I'm looking through the viewfinder, it's very important to me that the horizon's horizontal, and then if there's columns or any kind of vertical lines, I put them towards the edges of the frame, and I like to line them up with the edges of the frame. And the one thing I noticed is that there's a lot of distortion with this lens. I tried to film it with my phone up to the eye cup, but you can't really see it with the phone. So I'm just going to do a little diagram here to show you kind of what I'm seeing. So everything seems to be bowed outward from the center, and it's not particularly obvious all the time, but in certain situations when you're trying to compose something and you have something that's perfectly vertical, close to the right or the left of the frame, it does start to look like it's bowed outward. And I find that super frustrating, especially since I like to use lines to compose my shots. I find it like irritating almost. So I don't know if that's a deal breaker or anything, but it's just something to be aware of. So if you're shooting architectural photography and things like that, it might be frustrating, but it doesn't show up on the LCD screen. The LCD screen, everything looks perfect just the way it would, you know, if you're looking at it on your computer monitor. It's just that the magnification lens or whatever, the optics in the EVF distort your perspective of the screen in there. So yeah, that's a little bit frustrating. So that's my thoughts on the screen. I don't know if that can be adjusted in firmware or not, but hopefully that's something Canon can look into. All right, so let's talk about autofocus between the R5 and R5 Mark II. Which one has the better autofocus? Well, R5 Mark II. I mean, clearly it has more features. It's the newest generation of autofocus, so it's definitely better. I call the EOS R has first gen autofocus, and it's decent, and it just tracks people, but no animals, no cars. The R5 original tracks people, cars, and animals. It does a decent job. It will lose things from time to time, but more or less you're gonna get your shots. I have no complaints about this camera. The only time the autofocus on this camera failed me, and I don't know why, but it was the previous YouTube video I posted, this one right here. And you can see here in this example, it just kept losing me. And I filmed YouTube videos with glasses before and it was fine. And then these are new glasses and they're a little wider than the previous glasses I had. I'm filming with the R7 right now and it tracks me no problem. So I don't know. I don't know what happened, but that was the first and only time the R5 has failed me in terms of autofocus. I'm assuming it's the glasses. I double checked all my settings. Everything's good. So I don't know what to say about that, but it is what it is. If you're shooting weddings, this is fine. If you're shooting portraits of people, this is fine. If you're shooting food, architecture, product photography, I would guess street photography for the most part, unless you're really doing something quick where you're just, darting in and out and, jumping around. But in general, like normal street photography, urban photography, this is fine. The only place where this R5 Mark II really excels in is if you're shooting birds or animals, if you're shooting fast action sports, basketball, volleyball, that kind of thing. It actually has like action mode where you can set the camera or tell the camera you're shooting a specific sport, and it'll adjust its autofocus algorithms to look for the person with the ball or whatever the case may be. So you can actually tell it what sport you're shooting, and it'll adapt itself to that sport so you can get the best shot. So if you shoot action sports, then I would say the R5 Mark II definitely wins out over the R5 original. But if you're not shooting anything that's moving fast, the R5 is just fine. It's more than fine. It's great. Like, no complaints about this camera whatsoever, except that time when I was wearing glasses. All right, so let's throw up some examples as we talk about image quality. All right, little side-by-side comparison here, and we have the R5 on the right and R5 Mark II on the left. And is there a difference? Can you see a difference in image quality? But if we like pixel peep and zoom right in there and get really close, you can see that the R5 Mark II definitely has slightly sharper, crisper, more contrasty images, probably due to the fact that it has a brand new backside illuminated sensor. And okay, that's great. You can give the win to the R5 Mark II, but then you have to ask yourself, look at the price difference between the R5 and R5 Mark II. Are the R5 Mark II images that much better to warrant that price? And I'll submit to you that no, it's not. And if you look at like deliverables, when you deliver photos to your clients after you edit them in Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture One, whatever the case may be, is there really a difference? Is there going to be a difference? Is your client going to say, oh my God, I can't believe you shot with an R5 instead of an R5 Mark II. I can totally see the difference in the photos. No one's ever going to know. Like, there's not enough of a difference in image quality to even say that one camera is better than the other, because when it comes to the final deliverables, it's all a wash. It's all the same. You really can't tell. All right, so let's talk about video quality here. And it's the same story as in photo quality. The R5 Mark II has slightly sharper, cleaner, crisper video over the R. But again, you have to ask yourself, looking at the price difference, is that price difference really worth it for slightly crisper, cleaner images? You can only be the judge of that. I personally think it's not worth it. You're probably better off buying two R5s instead of the R5 Mark II. That way you have two cameras with the exact same sensor, same color science. It's great for color grading. And if you got to shoot two different angles, the footage looks identical. So if you're starting out a production company, I would suggest two R5s over the R5 Mark II. And if you really are interested in like a production camera and you want to shoot video professionally, the R5 Mark II probably is your backup choice, and the C80 is probably your first choice. Canon just announced the C80. It's a full-frame version of the C70. So, I mean, if you're looking to do video and that's your bag, I would say C80 over the R5 Mark II. R5 Mark II is more of like a photo camera with really good video specs. But there's one thing that the R5 Mark II has that the R5 doesn't, and that is C-Log 2. So if you're into shooting log with the most dynamic range, C-Log 2 in the R5 Mark II definitely has you covered there. So if that's important to you, then this is probably the win for you. All right, so now let's talk about the big L for the R5 Mark II, and that is battery life. The battery life on this camera is absolutely awful. Like, it is terrible. Like, I don't even know what Canon was thinking. I said when the R5 came out, they should come out with a new battery, like just change the physical size of the battery and make it bigger and better. And they didn't, and they definitely should have done that with the R5 Mark II. I get why they don't, and I would be, on the fence about the decision because I have a bunch of old batteries. But the thing is, those old batteries don't work in the R5 Mark II anyway, so they might as well have just come out with a new battery system. Okay, so here's the thing. You have to use the battery that came with this camera to access all the features that this camera has in terms of video mode, photo mode, all that stuff. If you don't use the batteries, the newest batteries, you don't get access to everything. But those features that you don't get access to, maybe you need them, maybe you don't, I don't know. But any batteries older than that, and the camera won't even turn on. Like the camera won't even flip on. You can't even take basic photos with older batteries, like nothing. So I guess if you're a wedding shooter, sports events, if you're out and about, you're gonna have to buy a bunch of the new batteries, especially if you don't wanna get caught with a dead camera. So that's definitely a huge negative. And the batteries don't last either. So I went out to shoot an air show and I shot photos, no videos, nothing fancy. I was just shooting raw files. I had a 300mm 2.8 on the front of the lens, or front of the camera, and I was tracking the airplanes. I have it in vehicle tracking. Actually, you know what? I wasn't even in high speed. I was just shooting away. And my battery was 50% drained within 35 minutes. Like 35 minutes and it's already half drained. Like that is unacceptable. That is massively unacceptable. Like here's a quick story. I was shooting a wedding with the 5D Mark III and I had 5 batteries. I always take 5 batteries to a wedding, and for whatever reason, my extension cord wasn't plugged into the wall when I was charging my batteries. I only had 1 charged battery, and I found out when I was at the wedding that I only had 1 battery. So I turned off the LCD, I turned back the playback, all that stuff, and I shot the whole wedding from about 11 a.m. till 9 p.m. on 1 battery, and I walked out of there with 1 bar of battery life left. So Canon used to have legendary battery life, but with the R5 Mark II, it's far from legendary. Obviously, you're gonna have to buy at least 4 or 5 batteries for the R5 Mark II if you wanna use it in the field and not have to rely on anything. I really think, like, Canon knows that the battery life on this camera is bad. Obviously, they should know. And they should offer anyone who's bought an R5 Mark II discounts on batteries. Let's say you get 2 batteries for, I don't know, one's 50% off or something. I don't know, Canon should offer something to its users because this battery life is really bad. So yeah, you're gonna have to invest in batteries, and that's a hidden cost. So this is the price of the camera. This is the price of the camera plus 5 batteries, which is what I recommend if you're out there shooting all day long. So that's the new price of the R5 Mark II with extra batteries, and that's crazy. Okay, here's a solution to get better battery life out of your R5 Mark II if you can't get a hold of the Canon official batteries. And by the way, I tried my dummy battery that I use in the R5, which I use for filming videos. I always plug it into the wall outlet with a dummy battery. That dummy battery does not work on the R5 Mark II. Why? I don't know. It's getting a current from the wall into the camera. So yeah, anyway. So this is a V-mount battery. This is a newer V-mount battery, and we have a PD USB-C cable coming out of it. And you can plug that cable into the camera and it'll power the camera. So you can actually shoot high quality video, photo, anything with this battery plugged into the camera, as long as there's a battery in the camera, of course, and you don't have to worry about battery life. Now it's a little inconvenient. You're gonna have to put this in a backpack or a side satchel or something like that and have it connected to the camera as you're running around shooting your wedding or your event or your sports or your birds or whatever. And obviously the camera isn't waterproof because now you have the side panel open. And another cool thing about this is you don't have to have it plugged into your camera all the time. Like, it's charging the battery right now in the R5 Mark II, which is great, and I can still shoot and charge the battery, so that's positive. The other thing too is if you just have this, and it's not too heavy, I'll put the weight down below, but you can put this in your camera bag, and between locations or between sets, or if you're shooting a wedding and going from the bride's house to the groom's house to the church, the reception hall, you can just have this in your camera bag, plug it into your camera, and it'll top up your battery on the way. So when you get there, your battery's back to 100%. So, you know, that's not the ideal solution, obviously, but it's a solution, and it's a solution we might have to consider if we're using the R5 Mark II, because the battery life on this camera, just like I said, terrible. Now, I went looking through the menus on both these cameras, and there's a feature on the R5 in the menu that doesn't exist on the R5 Mark II. So Canon, if you're listening, it would be great if you updated the firmware on the Mark II and gave us this feature. So the missing feature is continuous autofocus. So if you turn on continuous autofocus on the R5, it'll tell the camera to continually focus on whatever it is. So even if you put the camera down and it's on and there's a lens on there, it'll continually focus on anything in its field of view and track something, right? But if you turn off continuous autofocus, when you put the camera down and it realizes it's not active, it'll just stop tracking. It'll stop looking for something. So that saves a lot of battery life on the R5. And if you turn it on, it eats through batteries faster. But that feature is missing on the R5 Mark II. So Maybe Canon, if you add a continuous autofocus that we can turn off so that if we're not touching the shutter button or rear focus button, the camera will just kind of like cool it and stop tracking and using that AI chip and the Digic X processor. So yeah, that could definitely save on battery life. The other thing I mentioned earlier is the on-off switch. So when I'm shooting something, I'll flip the camera on, and when I'm not shooting, I'll just flip it off. And the nice thing is you can flip it on and off pretty quickly because the switch is right there. So that's a huge lifesaver. When I was shooting the air show, when I noticed that my battery was already half dead, I just turned off the camera. And then when I saw something I wanted to shoot, I flipped it on and started shooting. And here's a little trick I figured out. I have the sensor cleaning set to automatically turn on when the camera is turned off and on. So it's always shaking the sensor before, or I guess when I turn on the camera. And there's a little delay. So you turn on the camera, the sensor cleaning happens, and then you can shoot, and it takes about a second or two. So if you want to get around that, obviously turn it off if it's in the way. But if you tap the shutter release button as the sensor's cleaning, it'll disengage the sensor cleaning and go right into shooting mode. So there's a little trick I figured out there. But yeah, those are my thoughts on battery life. It's terrible. It is absolutely terrible. Meanwhile, with the R5, you can shoot with any battery that fits in it. And that's a huge plus. If you're shooting weddings, events, you're out in the wilderness, you're shooting nature, that kind of thing. Like, can you imagine shooting nature photography and being out in the wilderness with an R5 Mark II? Like, you're gonna need a bunch of these because the battery life is terrible. Anyway, that's it for battery life. All right, so let's take a look at the R5 Mark II and try and figure out who this camera is for, who should buy it and who should avoid it, because we know that the R5 Mark III is coming in July 2028, so don't have that FOMO and feel like, oh, I have to buy the Mark II because I'm going to miss out. Just think about the R5 Mark III, July 2028. That's when it's going to come out, because every 4 years there's a new 5 series camera, and Canon is like clockwork on this. So here's the updated price on the R5 Mark II, including 5 additional batteries. And I think that would be like the bare minimum in terms of what you would need to use this camera professionally. Because, I mean, look, if I'm 50% drained in about half an hour, that gives a battery an hour lifespan inside the studio, provided that the camera's on all the time and you're shooting content. So 5 batteries is safe if you're shooting weddings, events, or you're going out camping and you want the camera to last a weekend or something like that. I think 5 batteries, I know it sounds absurd, but I think that's, with the battery life of the camera, that's a fair assessment. So this is the new price of the R5 Mark II. This is the price of the R5 right now. So you can be the judge. Now, where does the R5 Mark II really shine over the R5? Sports, action photography, I think wildlife photography, birds, any kind of action sports, fast moving subject matter. So if you shoot anything like that, I think the R5 Mark II is definitely for you. That's in the column here for like highly recommended for you. This is a great camera for your field and for what you do. I mean, you got to ask yourself, like, if you're using the R5 right now and you're getting a lot of missed shots or blurry shots, or the camera isn't able to track what you need, then the R5 Mark II allows you to get those shots that you otherwise would have missed. And that, I guess, that gives you more deliverables to your clients and gives you more options. So maybe that's something that's important. Plus, the R5 Mark II has pre-shooting and pre-video. So if you're shooting sports, and you just kind of miss, the quarterback throwing the ball or the home run swing, it'll take shots before you take shots, so you actually have the shot even if you think you missed the shot. So for sports, action, wildlife, anything that's fast-paced, R5 Mark II, highly recommended. Now we have the second column, and that's shooting people. So if you're shooting portraits, you're shooting weddings, you're shooting, let's say, bands, you're shooting events, nightclubs, that kind of thing, the R5 Mark II is a maybe. It's a solid maybe, because if the R5 is doing exactly what you need, maybe double down on the R5 and get 2 of them. That way you have 1 lens on each camera and you're more mobile, or you don't have to switch lenses all the time. Maybe that's a better choice for you. But I've been shooting weddings with the R5, no issues, no complaints. You can shoot events, you can shoot in low lights, you can shoot portraits of people, that kind of thing. So no problems there, no issues, no complaints with that kind of stuff with the R5. So upgrading to the R5 Mark II is probably not recommended for people in that category. And then finally, we have people who shoot still life. You shoot food, you shoot products, you shoot setups, you shoot architecture, you shoot landscapes. You know, you're shooting subject matter that isn't moving at all, in which case I would probably recommend the EOS R. The EOS R is a fantastic camera, but we're doing R5 versus R5 Mark II. So if you're shooting things that don't move at all, autofocus isn't a huge concern. Pre-shooting, pre-video isn't a big concern. It's not a big deal. I would just stick to the R5. So only the people here who shoot fast action sports or anything like that, I think the R5 Mark II is good for you. If you're shooting studio work, portraits of people, if you're shooting still life, you're shooting food, buying the R5 Mark II, to be perfectly honest, is a complete waste of money. I mean, unless you're making good money and you can buy the R5 Mark II and write it off as a business expense, and that goes against what you pay in taxes and it's a tax write-off, blah, 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 blah. I mean, from a business side, yes, there's advantages to spending money, but in general, like, unless you really need that super high-speed autofocus, I don't really recommend the R5 Mark II. Wait for the R5 Mark III, because that will be a nice significant jump over the R5. So yeah. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that video. I picked up the R5 Mark II so I can make videos about it on YouTube, but I mean, personally, as a photographer, as somebody who runs a photography business, I probably wouldn't have bought it. I would have stuck with the EOS R5 because it's such an awesome camera, and the R5 Mark II doesn't offer me anything that's significant. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it was helpful for you. Hopefully it enlightened you a little bit. Now, keep in mind the R5 Mark II is on firmware 1. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I'm hoping that Canon updates the camera and improves battery life and things like that through firmware, adds more features into the menu like continuous autofocus. So if they do, I will be making an update video on R5 versus the R5 Mark II. Plus, I've only had the R5 Mark II for about a month now, and I just know what I know, but there's a lot of things I don't even know that I don't know yet. So I'm gonna keep learning about the camera, and I'll make like a better or updated version of this video if Canon updates the camera significantly. All right, so with that being said, peace out, thanks for watching. I will see you guys in the next video.